vlog instead of vlog, but I think vlog really is a word. So I'm starting this little vlog series called Thinking Out Loud. And the idea of thinking out loud is that I'm just going to be talking about arts and culture and film and literature and I mean just all kinds of good stuff. And the idea of it is to look at all those things, culture, art, literature, film, through the lens of human psychology. So I'm a licensed professional counselor in South Carolina. And so I have particular insights about why people do what they do and about meaning and how humans behave that I think are kind of interesting. And they interact really interestingly with culture and literature, film, art, all that kind of stuff. So so that's kind of the idea of this series. I have remarked to a bunch of my friends that one of the things I love to do is to think out loud. And so this isn't particularly scripted. I'm really kind of hoping not to have this be something highly scripted or planned out. I certainly have some, I guess, some structure. You'll feel that today, I think, but I don't really know exactly everything that I'm going to say. And that's, I think, fun, and I hope it'll be fun for you guys as you're watching this. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about, I guess I'm going to think out loud a little bit about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which I love this movie. We didn't have a lot of movies when I was growing up. Yeah, I mean, we had some, but we had this wonderful old VHS tape of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Love the movie. It's definitely my favorite of the original Indiana Jones trilogy. And I mean, come on, it's got Sean Connery in it. It's pretty cool. I had this desire to be an archaeologist after I watched that movie so many times. Because I mean, and of course, you know, what do you think being an archaeologist is that you run around, you know, getting the through hidden temples or whatever and get the artifact of great worth. And of course, it's all very exciting and you get in fist fights. And, you know, my guess is that that's not all that much like real archaeology. You know, probably a lot of it's digging around in the dirt and making measurements and writing things down in notebooks rather than how Indiana Jones does his thing. But it's all very exciting. Love the movie. So I was thinking about that movie not that long ago, and there's a portion of the film that it seems like there's actually quite a bit of psychological significance that's packed into this. I don't know, it's maybe 10 minutes of the movie. So I thought maybe I could think out loud a little bit about that. So, okay, I'll give you a brief overview of the movie if you haven't seen it. I'm also going to include links in the description for this video. I'll include links to the scenes that I'm going to discuss in full. And so probably if you have not seen the movie or if you haven't seen it in a while, it would be a great thing just to start by going back and watching those clips so you kind of know what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the basic plot summary of this movie. So Indiana Jones is this adventuresome, good-looking, you know, Harrison Ford, very good-looking archaeology professor who often is contracted by museums to go recover valuable artifacts. And he's contacted by this very wealthy guy named Donovan who found this medieval stone tablet, or he's part of a group that found this medieval stone tablet. And it has these long lost directions about where the Holy Grail is hidden. And so Indiana Jones is hired to go find it. His dad, for a long time, was interested in Grail lore and all that. But so they hire Indiana Jones to do it. In part because his father went missing while looking for the Grail. And so, you know, part of it's a search for the Holy Grail, part of it's a search for his father, which, of course, there's something meaningful there, right? That he's searching for something of extreme value. And one of the things that we sort out is that he has kind of a long-lost relationship with his father that's been lost and hidden away. And so maybe this is really what he's going after more than anything, is a relationship with his father. So the trouble is that the Nazis, of course, these are Indiana Jones movies, so the Nazis are also after the Grail. And so there's this race that's going on, right? Who can find the Grail first? Because if you find the Grail, we don't want the Nazis to find the Grail, because if they do, then they're going to be granted eternal life and power to heal and all these things, and we don't want that. So Then ensues a long assortment of intense action sequences. And as I was actually thinking about this movie, it's all these modes of transportation. So there's an exploding boat scene, there's motorcycles, there's planes, there's blimps, there's horses, there's tanks, all this thing. Okay, but so a bunch of action sequences happen, but basically what happens, they find out where the Grail is, and it's in this temple in this, special canyon, the Crescent Moon. And so, okay, so Indiana Jones and his friends, his father included, they go into this temple where the Grail is. And the Nazis are already there, and they've got these mercenary soldiers who are trying to go through these kind of booby-trapped passageways, and they're not being very successful. In fact, several of them have died already, and how they die is that their heads are cut off, and so their heads are rolling. And quite literally, their heads are rolling. Now they're caught. Indiana Jones and his friends and his father, they're caught, and they want to force Indiana Jones to go in and recover the Grail for them. But of course, he doesn't want to do that because he's seen a whole bunch of guys getting their heads chopped off. And so, he refused to do it. And so Donovan, it turns out he's a bad guy. Spoiler alert, sorry. He shoots Indiana Jones's father in the stomach. And so Indiana Jones now has a choice. He can either refuse to recover the Grail for the Nazis, but his father's going to die. Or he can go recover the Grail, and that will be the one thing that would save his father. So again, we see kind of this melding of the Grail and his relationship with his father. They kind of blend and become one and the same, which that's pretty interesting. So he decides that he's going to do that. Now this is what brings us to the part of the story that's of interest for this, conversation with myself today. He has to go through these tests, and I think they, in the movie, they talk about it as 3 tests. Really, it's 4 tests that he has to go through, and we're just going to go through those one at a time and think about what it is that they mean on a psychological level. We can almost think of them as like mythical or archetypal stories where there's a lot of meaning that's written into them. So first test, okay, this is the thing that was chopping all the heads off for the mercenaries. It's this test called the breath of God. Okay, and what happens is you walk through this little tunnel, and then the breath of God is said to blow at you, and then only the penitent man will pass, is what the Grail lore has said, is that only the penitent man will pass. And so clearly these other guys were not penitent. So let's talk just for a second about the breath of God. So the breath of God in biblical literature is the thing that gives life to the physical manifestation of the body, right? So God, in the Genesis creation narrative, God makes Adam out of dust. But Adam really isn't alive until it is that God breathed life into Adam, right? And so there's this sense that the breath of God is the thing that can give life to that which does not have life. Really deeply powerful. And so it's transcendent, right? It's powerful. It is perfect. It is the source where we come from. And so what's happening, right, is that all of these mercenaries are going in, standing up straight and tall, given, very afraid, but standing up tall with a sword out in front of them. And the idea there, right, is that they feel that they are a match, or some version of a match, for that which gives life, that which brings life to things that are inanimate, that are lifeless. And as Indiana Jones goes through, right, what's happening is he is repeating to himself, only the penitent man will pass, only the penitent man will pass. And then it occurs to him that the penitent man is humble before God, and the penitent man kneels. And so he kneels and narrowly misses this blade that comes to chop his head off. And he stops the wheel that has this whole blade contraption going and cutting heads off. Now, here's the deal, right? What would we make of that? It's something along the lines of humility when confronted with the power of nature or the power of life. And I'm not trying to be irreligious or sacrilegious here, but saying perhaps not all of us come from a religious persuasion or a biblical persuasion. And so we could think of it this way, right? That when confronted with the transcendent, we better be humble. We better be humble about it, and that's what allows us to survive. Alfred Adler talked about the need for us to have the courage to be imperfect, and sometimes we can think about it this way, right? To say, well, I'm not what I could be. I'm not quite as transcendent as I could be. I'm not as powerful as I could be, and I'm not even talking about those in selfish terms. You know, one way that we can be powerful is to be under our own control, to be self-controlled. And so, you know, when we're gluttonous or we're lustful or whatever else it might be, if we think kind of like 7 deadly sins, we're not as powerful as we could be if we were self-controlled. Right. And so Indiana Jones, when he confronts the power that brings life to that which is lifeless, that's something akin to nature. When he confronts nature, he acknowledges that he's not greater than it, right? To kneel, it's a posture of submission, of vulnerability, of acceptance, right? It's to say, I'm less powerful and you are more powerful, and I submit myself to that, and I give some honor to that. And penitence, in particular, it's not just humility, but it's actually there's a sense of repentance. So it's an acknowledgement of moral transgression. So it's not just, well, I haven't quite developed. It's that I'm also kind of screwed up. I've not done quite right. Some sorrow over immoral action. Now, this test, okay, the breath of God, it is opposed to pride. In essence, it's opposed to pride. And pride is what stands tall with the weapon out in front that says, this will protect me, I can protect myself, right? And that is a lot of how I think particularly in the modern era, how we go about doing life, is that we have this attitude towards nature that we've fully mastered it because we have a microwave that works in our house. We're very disconnected from the power of nature, of course, until a tornado comes along, or an earthquake, which we just had an earthquake in my area, a small one, but you know, an earthquake or a tsunami or a flood or any of these things. And there's something about when those things happen that we feel a bit put back by life. It's almost as though we feel entitled to have mastery over nature, and then nature on occasion reminds us, no, you're not what gives life. You don't get to decide whether material objects have life or not. So something like that, right? We're quite prideful as modern people. We have this sense that we can do whatever we like, and that we can protect ourselves by just standing up tall and holding weapons of some kind. So let's just take a minute to think about the punishment that is exacted on those who are prideful, who encounter the breath of God. So when we encounter something that is transcendent, that has the power to give life and apparently also to take it away, what happens is that the head is separated from the body, right? The head gets chopped off, and that's meaningful, right? Because the head, we could think of that as representative of logic, of reason, of intellect. It's separated from our bodies, which we might be able to see as more emotive, certainly sensory, and more action, right? Like the body is what gives movement to intellect or to reason. And that's really interesting, right? So when we're prideful, when we feel that we actually have, that we rule over nature, or that we are what is transcendent, and that there's nothing really greater than us, what happens is that our heads get disconnected from our bodies. Our intellect gets separated from our ability to act, to carry out what we know to be right. And that's very interesting, from a moral perspective. Morality often, it has very little to do with knowing right and wrong. Sometimes it does. Sometimes we need to be educated about what's right and wrong. But an enormous number of people, I'd say the vast majority of immoral action that occurs is not because somebody is ignorant to what is moral. but it's something else. And I guess we could look at this story and say one of the things that this story is telling us is that one way that we could look at it is that we might know what is right, but our bodies don't carry it out, in part because we are prideful and because we think that we are the most transcendent thing in existence, and that there's nothing that might be more powerful than us or that could take our lives away from us. So there's something about that that's pretty meaningful. So we could sum it up this way. The psychological significance of this initial task is this. To act as though we are greater than nature or what is transcendent, or certainly in a religious perspective, to think that we're greater than God leads to a disconnect of reason and emotion, a disconnect of intellect and action, and to act in accordance with our imperfections, that's our courage to be imperfect, that actually keeps our mind and our bodies intact. It keeps them together so that, okay, maybe we're not perfect. You know, maybe we don't do everything that we should do, and maybe we don't do everything exactly like we should, but we're also in a penitent position. And that's what protects us from having our intellect and our reason separated from that which might give motion to it, which might give movement to our intellect and our knowledge of what's right and wrong and what's proper, and maybe even our own strength, right? It's one thing to know things, and it's another thing to have the strength to do what we know, to act in light of what we know. Just a simple example of this, right, is that I used to have terrible arachnophobia. And logically, I understood that spiders were not going to kill me. I had some strange illogical thoughts about it, but I also could see that those thoughts were illogical, you know, that spiders were going to drop on me in the middle of the night and bite into my jugular and inject their venom, and that was going to make its way to my heart, and I was going to have a heart attack. Those were things that I'd think about, but I understood that they were illogical. But whole other thing to get my body to move close to a spider or not to run away. In other words, my head and my body weren't on the same page. And one of the things that I had to do with that was to acknowledge my own weakness, and how I acknowledged it was by moving towards that which was most frightening for me. And what that did is it made me nauseous. So there was this spider at a window, and I'd go stand by the window and stare at this spider with just, you know, a few inches between me and the spider. But of course, a window between us. And I felt nauseous, and I felt incredibly anxious and afraid. And that was weakness that I really didn't want to confront, right? Which is why I would just avoid spiders, is I didn't want to acknowledge that weakness in me or that vulnerability. And so rather, when I acted in accordance with my imperfections, with my own weaknesses, with my own vulnerabilities, that is actually what helped me to overcome my fear of spiders and to get my body and my mind on the same page to reconnect them after my kind of metaphorical decapitation. That got a little weird, but I think we got it. Okay, so here's the deal. So this next task, we'll move through this quite a bit quicker. Next, and I'm sorry, I'm like rubbing my nose over here. I got like an allergy or something going on. No COVID, I swear. Okay, so next test, the Word of God, or they also call it the name of God. So Indiana Jones comes to this place, and there's all these, let's say, it's almost like tiles out on this flat ground, and there's Latin letters written on each of these tiles, one letter per tile. And the question here is, well, some of the tiles, if you step on them, you're going to fall through into this abyss. They're not solid, right? They don't stand up under the weight of us. That's psychologically significant. And so for Indiana Jones, what he has to do is he has to know the name of God and step on the tiles that spell out the name of God, and that's what will get him safely across. So here's what happens, right? So he says, well, the name of God is Jehovah, and it starts with J. And so he steps on the J and falls straight through because, of course, Jehovah in the Latin alphabet, using the Latin alphabet, Jehovah starts with an I. And so he almost dies, but pulls himself back up, reminds himself of this fact, and then makes his way across. So, okay, let's talk for a second about the name of God. And we'll talk about this both from a religious context, but then, you know, obviously if some of you aren't entrenched in biblical literature or don't have a religious persuasion, we'll talk about it in a well, I guess you could call it a broader meaning, but I guess if you're religious, you might even look at it as a more narrow meaning. But let's talk about, in biblical literature, the name of God was deeply important. So one of the things that ancient folks would, when cultures came together, there was this question of, well, what God do you worship? And so they needed to know the name of their God. Well, I worship Marduk. Well, I worship Ra. Well, I worship Yahweh. And of course, Yahweh is what we translate into Jehovah. So Yahweh, the Hebrew translation or pronunciation, and Jehovah is how we kind of translated that from a Latin alphabet. So, for instance, when Moses, when he sees the burning bush in the book of Exodus, he hears this, the voice that he clearly recognizes as God, telling him that he needs to go back to Egypt and to free the people of Israel from slavery. And Moses asks him a very interesting question. He says, well, who should I say sent me? In other words, he's saying, well, what's your name? And God says, well, I am, which that's kind of how maybe in the English we would translate Yahweh. So there's something just deeply important about the name of God. And there's even a great power that's given to the name Yahweh or Jehovah. So for instance, when I don't know, I can't remember if this is something I learned in seminary, or maybe this is one of these pop Christian culture things that gets repeated in sermons, and who knows if it's really true or not. But I think that it probably is true that when Hebrew scribes, when they were, copying scriptures by hand, that when it came time to write the word, to write the name of God, to write Yahweh, it was a whole host of rituals. And I'm thinking maybe that they had to wash their hands before and after. Perhaps they had to use a different quill or pen. And that if they messed it up, then they had to throw away the whole scroll. It was things like this. And I might not be perfectly accurate on that, but certainly there was an immense reverence that was given to the name of God. Now, okay, so let's talk about this from a psychological perspective. Why might that be important? Well, we could think of it this way, that what's being demanded by this test, right, the knowing the name of God, we have to, on some level, as linguistic creatures and human beings, we are incredibly linguistic creatures. It's something that, not to say that other animals don't communicate, and they actually communicate in ways that are far more complex, I think, than we usually give them credit. But we have an incredibly complex way of communicating with each other as human beings, as a species. And so one of the things that's kind of asked of us is that we need to find a way to articulate linguistically what is of ultimate importance and what it is that we worship. And okay, so that's a religious term, but let me religionize. That's not a word, but I think you guys understand what I'm saying. Let's pull it out of a religious context. We might say this, that when we say that we worship something, what we're doing is we're saying, this is something that is so valuable that I am willing to sacrifice for it, that I'm willing to endure suffering for it, that I'm willing to forego pleasure for it. I'm willing to obey what it requires of me, things like this. So, for instance, if you worship money, one of the things that you'll probably do is spend an inordinate amount of time working or studying or, I don't know, planning a bank heist, or, I guess it depends on how you go about making your money, but you're gonna sacrifice to it. If what you worship is money, you will absolutely sacrifice to money. If what you if what you worship is the approval of others, you'll do anything. You'll endure all kinds of suffering and forego all kinds of pleasure and health in order to get some applause from others. But often what we do is that in the background, we have our God, but we're not able to articulate it linguistically, right? So when I work with clients and we find out that what it is that they really worship, what they're willing to sacrifice to is, let's say, perfectionism or comfort or whatever. If I were to sit down and say, well, what's most important to you? No one would say, well, being perfect or comfort. They're not quite able to articulate it symbolically using language. And that can be quite fatal. And I actually mean that pretty literally. It can be fatal. It can kill you. Um, it can kill you in an ultimate sense, where, like, I mean, your body actually dies, as what happens in the case of suicide or addiction or some things like that. But also, I mean, it can kill you in other ways. I mean, it can kill relationships. You can kill a version of yourself. You can kill what you could be. These are all things that can die. And so there's a kind of fatal quality to not being able to articulate what it is that's ultimate to us, what we're willing to worship. Now, I don't want to skip this, right? That there's something pretty interesting about the fact that he misspells it, and that almost is fatal for him. That's a near fatal thing. And I feel like there's something there about being encapsulated in our own experience or culture. Maybe we could think of it as family too, right? So he's operating as an American male, and so there's a J sound, and so, well, that's a J. And of course then he's wrong about that, and it almost kills him. And by extension, it almost kills his father. Because if he dies, then he doesn't get the Grail, and if he doesn't get the Grail, then his dad dies. And so we could think of it this way, right? If the only way that I'm able to articulate what it is that is most important, that's most valuable, that's transcendent, that is worth worshiping or sacrificing for, if the only way that I can articulate that is, well, this is how I first imagine it to be, and that must be how it is, then we're going to make some pretty fatal errors. And I mean, I see this, that you come out of a, let's say, conservative Christian home, or let's say a very liberal agnostic home, or let's say a democratic home, or a conservative home, or a libertarian home, or something like this. Then what you do is that you're limited in your ability to really correctly articulate what is most meaningful and what is worth sacrificing for. It's all limited because you're just so caught up in, well, this is my experience, and that's all that there is. And so, of course, when he comes back out, he thinks back on learning, and, oh, that's a different language. This is Latin. This is not American English. This is Latin that we're talking about. And so Jehovah starts with an I, and that's what provides him some safety. He's able to kind of get out of his own cultural experience, and we might also think about that as just individual experience, private experience of the world. So to wrap it up, psychological significance. We must be able to identify and articulate linguistically what is transcendent and ultimate. To not know the name of God is fatal. To not know the name of your respective God, whether that's perfectionism or money or comfort or approval or being the smartest guy in the room or smartest girl in the room, whatever it might be, that's fatal. And to assume that our first instincts about what is transcendent are correct, to have this idea, yeah, this is what makes sense to me, and so that must be how it is, without considering our biases, that also can be at least near fatal and maybe fatal. But to know the name of God, and we could put it this way, to know the name of our God, to know the name of what it is that we most want to worship, and to connect that to a larger historical cultural context, right, that transcends our personal experience, that's what protects us from falling. That's what protects us from falling down in the abyss and dying. So let's say in a clinical example, one of the things that I do is I work a lot with clients on these things called fictional finalisms, and we'll talk about this more with another one of the tests from the film. Fictional finalisms are these things that it's almost as though you could say, well, this is what life means. And most of the time when we talk about the meaning of life, we give aspirational answers to that question. What does life mean? We say, well, it's about family and relationships, or perhaps if we're religious, well, it's about what's a Westminster Catechism? The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Okay, now don't hear me having a beef with that. Okay, I'm not arguing with those things by any means. I love family and relationships, and as a Christian, I affirm the Catechism, but they're aspirational, and it's proper that they're aspirational. But if we were more honest about just on a day-to-day level, what's true, this is how we probably answer questions is, well, life means get the applause of others. Life means don't upset people. Life means don't ever make mistakes, or if you do, hide them well. Those are the things that we set as ultimate, right? But as long as we're unaware of that, we're really not able to articulate it. We go about doing life and we think to ourselves, well, why am I doing all these strange things? I keep saying that, well, life is about family and relationships, but I can't keep any friendships. You know, the slightest inconvenience that somebody causes me, I just broom them. I get so angry and I get hateful and I do mean things and it ruins all my relationships. I must be so crazy. But if we were just to slow down and to say, well, actually, if we were to look at you honestly, what's going on is that you say life is about being comfortable and about not upsetting anybody. And in that case, it makes an incredible amount of sense that you behave the way that you do, because the moment that somebody gets upset, you feel like a failure and you want to defend yourself against feeling like a failure. So you get defensive. And then, of course, that develops into becoming angry. And nobody likes to be around somebody who has a sense of entitlement to their applause. Like that's not a fun person to be around. And so generally you're not going to do very well with family or with relationships if what life is about is comfort. But when we're able to articulate that linguistically, you know, perhaps, I mean, and I see this happen all the time in therapy. This is in large part what we're trying to do in therapy, is to articulate what is your fictional finalism? What is it that life means to you? Honestly, not aspirationally, but honestly. One of the things that then happens is that you can look at it and say, well, that's not quite right. It's almost, oh, that's not how you spell Jehovah. That's not how you spell Jehovah. And so you can climb out and then you try again. You say, well, actually, this seems like a better way to go. Okay, so I think we covered that fairly well. Okay, third test here, the path of God. So Indiana Jones, he walks down this really narrow corridor. There's this mouth of this lion here, right? And the mouth of the lion, right? It's all at once representing something majestic, but also quite dangerous, right? And so it's this symbol of a predator that sits right there. So and so it's like, this is what you have to get away from, Indiana. You see, you can't stay by the mouth of the lion. You've got to move away from that. But then he steps a little bit further out, and there's this huge abyss, and he can see a passageway on the other side, straight across. But it's this thing of like, well, I can't make that jump. But here's the thing: the mouth of the lion is there, right? The mouth of the predator is there, waiting to eat him. I am speaking metaphorically, of course. It's waiting there to eat him, and so he has to sort out what he's going to do. And so what he does is that he calms himself down, and what he decides to do is to step out in faith and trust that although he cannot see anything below his feet, that there's something there that will catch him and allow him to cross over to the other door. So this is meaningful on a few different things. Now, human beings, we're essentially, well, before I go on, let me explain what happens. So he does this. He steps out, and sure enough, his foot lands on solid ground. And so he's able to walk across toward this other door. And then, and we'll talk about why this might be meaningful. Then he kneels down and he grabs some gravel. He looks back and he tosses it out. And the gravel spreads out on top of this thing. And that makes it so you can see that there is, in fact, a path there. This is a stone path. Okay, now let's talk about paths. Human beings are essentially travelers. Okay, if you believe anthropologists, and I do, maybe you don't, and that's okay. But if you believe anthropologists, human beings evolved in the Horn of Africa, and then in an incredibly short period of time, if we're speaking in evolutionary terms, or in the terms of global history, in an incredibly small period of time, human beings move all over the globe, even to places that are like pretty tough to access, like Polynesia and Australia. I mean, these are not easy places to get to, and human beings even got there. So in a lot of ways, what we are as a species is we're travelers, right? We're very much travelers. Even if you don't think that, okay, let's say that you're a 6-day creationist Christian, conservative evangelical. You can think of it this way, right? That the call of God in Genesis is to multiply and scatter, multiply and scatter, multiply and scatter. And God's rebuke of the people of Babel is in large part is that they refuse to scatter. And so he accomplishes his purpose by going down and confusing their language and forces them to scatter. And so, of course, he's sending them on paths. He's making them travel. So you can understand that human beings as a species, we are travelers. And so paths are pretty important to us. Even in scripture, we talk about the straight and narrow path. And what that would mean, right, is that, well, it is straight, it's pretty direct, but it's also, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room here. There's only there's a small matrix of, there's a very small set of things to be done that are proper, right? That's kind of what the straight and narrow might mean. And we use path language for that. That's kind of interesting. Now, and this is where it's really important for us as we're thinking about this film. Paths imply a place of departure and a place of destination. Okay, and a place of departure is, well, this is where I don't want to be. And a place of destination or arrival is, well, that's where I want to be. Alfred Adler talked about that human beings are constantly moving away from a felt minus, that's like the yucky feelings, the way that we don't want to be, towards a felt plus, and that's the yay, I want to feel that way feelings. Now, it's not that we are, there's a spectrum here. A professor of mine used to say that better is always better, better is not always good. And so as we're moving away from a minus towards a plus, it's not that we always feel splendid, but we feel, better. So this is what the lion's mouth represents, right? This is the place of departure. You can't be here, because this is the mouth of the predator, and you have to move away from the mouth of the predator towards something else. So he's got a place of departure and a place of destination. He wants to move away from the mouth of the lion towards this other place where the Holy Grail is kept. Now Indiana Jones, he looks at it and he says, well, impossible. No one can jump this. That's what he says. Impossible. No one could jump this. And of course, he's correct. There's something here that is meaningful about being or becoming. Lots of people want to be things. Not many people want to become things. It's like lots of people want to be a doctor because they want the prestige and they would love the salary and they like to do all the exciting things like cool surgeries. And, doctors they're afforded lots of cool things that the rest of us aren't. Everybody would kind of like to be well, not everybody, but a lot of people would like to be a doctor. But do you want to do all the studying? Do you want to not go to that? Do you not want to not hang out with your friends in college because you have to study the extra 7 hours for the biology exam to keep your GPA up high enough so you can get into a med school? Well, no, right? We kind of joke about organic chemistry as like the weed out thing, right? And so everybody wants to be a doctor, but part of what it means to become a doctor is that you take organic chemistry and you do well in it. And so people drop like flies, and so you don't do it. And of course, this is not even to mention the rigors of med school, right? That my brother-in-law is in med school right now, and it's no piece of cake doing all that. And so he's in the process of becoming. Everybody would like to be things, but not all that many people would like to become things. And so what Indiana Jones is observing, right, is, well, I can't get there in one leap. What the heck? Wouldn't that be nice if I could just, jump it and I could be over there? But what is asked of him is that he has to become someone who is over there, step by step, progressively. And that feels pretty meaningful. So then what he has to do is that he has to act, although he can't see that there is a path, that there's anything solid to hold him up, he has to act as if there is something there. So he sticks out his foot and he puts his weight down and of course, then his foot lands. And this is a meaningful concept. Alfred Adler talked about the power of acting as if sometimes I put it to my clients this way, that it is actually more effective, quite frequently, to act our way to a feeling than to feel our way to an action. And often it's something that I have to personally disabuse myself of this, and I disabuse my clients of this idea that we have to feel like doing something before we do it. That's not true at all. And this is a moment in film that is depicting this, right? Is that the only way that he can know, intellect, that there is something there to hold him up is to have his body feel it, to have his body move before his intellect says, yes, this is what it is. So this is, in a way, it's kind of a flip of the first test, right? The first test says, you can't rely too much on your intellect or your body is going to get disconnected, right? And so what you have to do is actually get your intellect in a certain position where you say, well, I'm not what I could be. I need to be humble. I need to be penitent. And then my mind will cause my body to take on a certain posture and to get down. Well, it's reversed here. The body is actually asking the intellect to get into a certain posture. So the body moves and then the mind ascends. The mind agrees with the body after the body's moved, not before. And that is often how we go about doing things. So sometimes people will say, oh, I couldn't get out of bed, I was depressed. And that's not untrue, but it's also true, we could reverse it and say, well, you're also depressed because you're not getting out of bed. Because when you don't get out of bed, you're not productive. And when you're not productive, you don't feel like you contribute. When you don't feel like you contribute, you don't really have a sense of belonging. And if you don't have a sense of belonging, then we're really chipping away at some pretty foundational stuff. We think Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's physical needs, safety needs, and then the next thing are belonging needs. We really have a deep need to belong. And in part, how we do that is that we contribute. We do that by getting our butts out of bed and doing something. It's not really about making money so much as it is about lending a hand. So we can just see there's a bidirectional relationship there, right? That sometimes it's that the body follows the mind, but it's also the other way around. Sometimes the mind follows the body. And so after Indiana Jones gets to the far side, then what he's able to do, after his body has moved out away from the mouth of the predator towards where he needs to be, then he's able to look back and in a way reconstruct or represent what he's gone through to himself with more certainty, right? So he throws the gravel and now it's like, okay, I've done it and now I know it because I did it. It's not I know it and therefore I can do it. Sometimes it's I did it and therefore I know it and I can remember even. Okay, so I could sum it up this way. To get away from our places of departure and arrive at our destinations, it's often required that we act before knowing that it will be safe. This is something I tell my clients and I tell my children. Courage, not knowledge or safety, is the remedy to fear and anxiety. It's what, within the context of the film, it's what proves our worth and allows us to be on our way to being what we need to be or to being where we are. That's the process of becoming. Once we've acted, we're able to look back and reconstruct the past, represent the past, to understand how safe we really were. This is done backwards, not forward. So you go ride the roller coaster, and at the end of the roller coaster ride, that's how you know that roller coasters are safe. I mean, yeah, you can look at statistics, but again, that's kind of, that's head separated from body, right? We can know that the roller coaster is safe, but our body shies away from the line to get on. Well, I hope that makes some sense. Okay. Fourth and final task, the Grail choice. Okay, so he crawls through, there's a knight back there, and the knight's in this room full of all these big cups. And the question is, well, which one is the Grail? And the knight makes clear to Donovan, now who's followed behind Indiana Jones and, mooched off of all of his courage and bravery, and that happens sometimes too, right? That we represent the past to other people and they get to benefit from it. And that can be a good thing. It also can be a bit exploitative, and we need to watch out for that. So here's Donovan, and he's in there, and he wants the Grail. He wants the Grail, and he wants it for himself, for power. And so the knight said, well, you have to choose. Now, immediately, well, I guess, perhaps before I go further in the in the plot. Let's stick a pin in it, okay? We're right where Donovan's about to choose the cup, or he's being asked to choose the cup. Let's talk about the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail has become this metaphor that we use to explain, like, oh, that's the Holy Grail of computing science, meaning that's the thing that if we could get that, everything else would pale in comparison. It's the thing of ultimate worth. And that's even entered our, colloquial phrases. We refer to things as holy grails, meaning that's as good as it could get. If you could have that, everything else would pale in comparison. So it's the object of infinite value. And because it's of infinite value, we're willing to leave safety. We're willing to dedicate our lives to it. We're willing to risk suffering or failure. It's an ultimate thing. That's maybe a good Tim Keller word for it. It's an ultimate thing. Now, the essential challenge of this choice or test of, how do you pick the Holy Grail out of all these cups is this. Are we able as human beings to properly identify what is of ultimate value? Or are we going to pick a knockoff? Now, okay, so we have two guys who drink out of cups, okay, and there's very different results. First, Donovan, okay? Now, he's challenged to choose for himself what cup is the Grail. Now, immediately what he does, we're going to look at Donovan's way, and then we'll look at Indiana Jones's way. Donovan's way, the first thing that he does is that he abdicates his choice. He asks Ilsa, this kind of, witchy broad who's with him. He asks her to pick. And she looks around and she picks this, and admittedly, absolutely beautiful cup, which, by the way, looks a lot like the Holy Grails that you might see in paintings or, a fresco or, a medieval fresco or something, which I don't, is there such a thing as medieval? I don't even know. I'm not from the art world, but looks very much, it looks almost like stereotypically, it's like, oh yeah, that's the Holy Grail. So he's very entranced with it, and he's entranced with the beauty of it and the fancy schmanciness of it. It's gilded and it's what looks good. It's superficially valuable. It's probably a lot like all the other representations that he's seen before. So again, you can see that he's relying on someone else to tell him what it is, right? He relies on Ilsa, but then probably also on memory and paintings that he's seen in books. And he's just caught up in the trappings of this cup. Now, the other thing that he does is he goes over and he's going to drink. It's very clear that what he is after immortality for himself and power for himself. And that's kind of interesting. So he drinks, and let's just say it doesn't go well. I won't get to all the details of what happens to him, but it doesn't go very well. Now, okay, so now it's Indiana Jones's turn after Donovan is melted quite literally into dust. And that's kind of interesting, right? It's from dust you came, from dust you will to dust you will return, and he sure does. And it accelerates that, right? For him to choose poorly, to identify wrongly what is of ultimate value. It accelerates his aging and his death and his return to dust. That's meaningful. Now, Indiana's way. He starts looking around for a cup. For one, he doesn't abdicate choice, right? He doesn't give Ilsa another chance to pick or anything. He sees it. It's his responsibility to choose. And he doesn't look to Ilsa or to the knight for cues of approval. He's not looking at that either. He really does understand it. This is my responsibility. It's my choice to decide what it is that's of ultimate value here. Now, the second thing that he does is that he remembers the identity of the transcendent. He really has a clear understanding of what it is that's transcendent. So he knows that Christ was a carpenter. And so he looks for the cup of a carpenter, not for the cup of a political king, which is what Donovan found. He found the cup of a political king. But Indiana Jones remembers the identity of what is transcendent. He has a clear idea of its role, of how it functions, of what it does. That's meaningful. He takes this cup, and why he drinks from the cup is not to get immortality for himself or power for himself. What he's doing, he's actually acting as a kind of cup-bearer for his father to say, is this the thing? Is this really the thing that will heal my father and save him? And of course, again, by extension, you see what will save my relationship with my father. And there's some meaning there, right? It's also how do we reconcile with our past? How do we reconcile where we came from, flawed as it is? Well, that's all pretty meaningful. So he's not in it for himself. He's testing it out, not for himself, but for other people. That echoes Adler's idea of Gemeinschaftsgefühl, which is this German term meaning like community feeling or communal feeling, meaning that we have this clear sense, and it's an emotional sense, that the well-being of others is inextricably tied to our own well-being. A concern for the group, we could call it, or for the community, and that's very much what he's doing, right? He's putting himself, after watching another guy melt away, he's putting himself at pretty intense risk, but he's doing it in order to be of help to somebody else, not to claim the object for himself. Okay, so remember I had mentioned fictional finalisms, those things that we kind of set our eyes on or we set our lives on. It's a direction, a telos. That's a Greek word meaning like an endpoint or a goal, a target. And a fictional finalism is this thing. It's fictional in the sense that we invent it for ourselves, and it's a finalism in the sense that, yeah, okay, that's our target, that's our goal. And in large part what that is, right, is it's our way of saying this is what's of ultimate value. So if my fictional finalism goes something like this and it says, well, life is about getting the approval of others, well, what's of my holy grail is the approval of others. And that's what I'm willing to sacrifice for, and it's what I'm willing to suffer for, and it's what I'm willing to forego pleasure for, is to have the approval of others. Now, the trouble is, right, that often we're mistaken about what's ultimate, right? I mean, you get the approval of others, and it's kind of satisfying, maybe a little bit, but it's really not quite worth it. It's not quite worth what we give up to get it. And so it's dissatisfying, but also it's also the thing that will kill us over time. I mean, you'll do all kinds of things that you're not supposed to do in order to get the approval of others, but you also not do a bunch of things that you should do because you want the approval of others, and that will slowly kill you. And really, actually, and probably not all that slowly. In fact, it's going to accelerate you dying in the same way that Donovan's aging process and dying process was accelerated by him setting his eyes, misidentifying what was most meaningful and what was transcendent, what was ultimate. Sir Richard Livingstone, it was like a educational guy. He put it this way, and I might not nail this quote. I think I've got it though. He said, we are apt to think of moral transgression as being due to weakness of character. More often it is due to an inadequate ideal. I'll say it again, and maybe I'll put it in the description of the video too so you can read it. We are apt to think of moral transgression as being due to weakness of character. More often it is due to an inadequate ideal. And what he's getting at here, right, is that we're mistaken about our finalism. We set our sights on something that is inadequate. It doesn't stand up to what we give up to get it. So that's kind of interesting, and seems to kind of manifest itself in this story or this test of the Grail choice, right? It's, can you pick the thing that really is of ultimate worth? Because if you can't, it's going to speed up your aging and dying process. It's going to kill you. It's going to put you to dust very quickly. But if you choose the thing of ultimate value, and you don't just choose it for you, but you choose it for others, that's the thing that will bring life. That's the thing that will heal and restore. And that's pretty interesting. Now, one last thing with this, and then I'll wrap all this up because I know I've been talking for a while. Here's the other thing. After it becomes clear that Indiana Jones has chosen wisely, as the knight says, he's picked the Grail. one of the things that the knight tells him is you can't cross the seal that's on the floor down in the front room of the temple. You can't cross that, or the Grail can't leave past that seal. Now that's pretty interesting, because what's happening there, right, is that he's saying you're not allowed to take the thing of great value out into the place where it's easily accessed. And that is, I mean, that's psychologically and existentially important for us to understand, that the things that are most meaningful are not easy, and they demand risk, and they demand, let's say, steps of faith. They demand our ability to articulate what it is that's transcendent and ultimate, that is worth worshiping. It demands penitence and a courage to be imperfect, and awareness of our own limitations. It demands some wisdom about the nature of what is ultimate and transcendent and worthy of sacrifice. Right? You don't get to take it out into the world where you don't have to go through those trials to get to it. And then also, right, there's also responsibility. The whole reason that the knight has been there the whole time is because he had a responsibility to protect the Grail. And so that's part of it too, is that you can't have it and not protect it. You can't have, let's say that we might say that having a family is something that is important and worthwhile. Well, you don't get to have a family, or at least a good family, without protecting it. And I don't mean, from robbers or home invaders. I mean from things like petty arguments and quarreling, or, competition, or things like that. You don't get to have it without protecting it. And so that, I mean, that's something, worth thinking about. That's really interesting. Even if we were to pick something kind of petty like money, like you don't get to have money when you don't protect money. If all you do is you have money and then you spend money, well, you're gonna go broke, and it kind of doesn't matter how much money you make, you're gonna go broke because you're not protecting it. It is worthwhile. It's not ultimate, I don't think, but it's worthwhile, and so to have it, you got to protect it. And you certainly can't have it out there there's no such thing as a free lunch. There's no such thing as free money. So you can't just be out in the world not engaging in the risky things, not being able to articulate what's worthwhile on some verbal level without taking any steps of faith, only doing what you feel like doing, and being able to access that which is worthwhile. Okay, I think we're seeing that. That's been super helpful for me to think about. I've got all of these things, applications for myself. I'll sum it up this way, right? Psychological significance of this last test: to gain the object that heals and extends life. And that's what the Grail really does. We must be responsible for our own choice, or choices. We have to choose in accordance with what we know to be truly transcendent. That's interesting. And we have to choose the well-being of others. You can't be a self-encapsulated, getting this and it's going to be for me only. We can never assume that this is something that can be taken into the non-perilous places of life, but has to remain in the more remote caverns of life that are rife with dangers, right? And trials and terrors. And to have ongoing access to what's most meaningful, we have to protect what is most meaningful. Okay. Now, one final observation here. So this kind of dramatic scene at the end where Ilsa tries to cross the seal with the Grail, and the ground opens up and swallows her up, right? And that's kind of interesting, because if you try and break the rules of how ultimate things work, the earth will swallow you up. And right, I mean, that's what the grave does. The grave swallows you up, you die, and then they stick you in the ground, they cover you up. So the earth has swallowed you. That's a fatal mistake. And then the Grail, it falls too, right? And so what is meaningful becomes, is also at risk of being lost. And so Indiana, he's trying to grab it, and his father tells him to let it go. And what he's inviting him to see, right, is that the Grail as an object, it's important, but the main thing within the context of the story is that it saved his father. And so now he gets to have this relationship with his father, and that's been kind of a theme through the whole movie is, how do we recover a relationship that we've lost? And they've recovered it. right? And in part because Indiana, at great risk to his own life, saved his father. And that has not only restored his father's body, but it's restored the relationship. And that really maybe is the ultimate thing within the context of the movie. He's saying, it's just a thing. It's not worth dying over. But the relationship is, right? Because that's what we just saw. Is we saw Indiana Jones act as if it's worth dying to try and save the relationship with his father. And so he consents. He gives his father his other hand, pulls him up, and then they quite literally ride off into the sunset. So there's something significant about that too, right? That sometimes what we see as the object that holds, we identify an object as being the thing that is most meaningful when it's actually the emergent properties of the object that are most meaningful. So for instance, money. It's not unimportant to have money, right? I mean, but why is it important to have money? It's not just for like to have certain numbers on your bank statement. It's that to have money is what affords us to have a roof over our head or to put food on our table. So that's our survival. But it's also the thing that might empower us to be helpful to others and to be, to better our community. And in that sense, money is, immensely meaningful. But it's not like the dollar. The dollar bill, it represents something else that's meaningful in the same way that the Grail, what happened is that to have the Grail, the emergent property of Indiana Jones having the Grail, was that he was able to save his father so that there was a relationship to be had. And of course, the father that represents some authority, our source, where we come from, our history, culture, all those kinds of things. Those are maybe what we might be able to identify with a father figure. That's all, and that's all pretty interesting to restore our relationship to where we come from, our past, certainly to family. Father would represent family. Those are all things that are. We could think of it this way, right? That whatever we set our sights on, maybe one of the things that is important about what we set our sights on is that it empowers us to reconcile ourselves with our past, with our family, with those that we're in relationship with. That seems meaningful. Anyways, all this to say, pretty cool that in a movie that I saw when I was a little kid, that there's so much psychological significance packed into just maybe even, 10 minutes, 10, maybe 15 minutes of film. This is the kind of thing that I'm going to do. Hopefully these will be shorter in the future. This is kind of a longer discussion with myself, but hopefully they'll be a little bit short. I'm hoping to shoot for, 20 to 30 minutes, something like that. If you guys have suggestions of things, you say, hey, this story is interesting to me. You could always give me suggestions and I'll think out loud about it. So thank you so much for joining Thinking Out Loud. This feels so silly calling it an episode. I don't know. I feel like I don't feel like it. I am. I'm just talking at my dining room table into my computer screen, which that feels maybe a little bit strange or lame. But it's been fun. I feel like I advanced some of my own thinking, and it's always fun to share thoughts. I think that's actually how I end up advancing thinking, is by sharing. Okay, so episode 1, thank you for watching. Feel free to leave comments, to share, subscribe. I feel like I'm such a dweeb vlogger, not by asking you to subscribe, but you're welcome to do it if you'd like. Won't hurt my feelings if you don't. Thank you so much. Bye.